Karen Whitmore practically shouted across the cabin as she stepped into the aisle, her arm lifting like a living steel barrier. "Stop! That's not your seat!" The words sliced through the quiet first-class air like a blade sharp enough to make the champagne glasses tremble. In a single breath, the entire cabin tilted into chaos, as if everyone had just witnessed a disaster rushing straight towards them. Sofia Ramirez stood 3 steps away, back straight, breathing slow, her gaze calm to the point of contradiction with the humiliation unfolding in front of her. But deep in her chest, her heart tightened for one measured beat, not from fear, but from recognition. Because this moment was familiar, the moment when someone looked at her Latina face and believed they already knew the entire story of her life. Karen was different. In the eyes of the 44-year-old white woman, this was not a seat. It was territory. Seat 1 at the heart of first class, the symbol of status power, unquestioned priority. Anyone who sat there to Karen had to look like someone who deserved it. And Sofia, filtered through her prejudice, did not. Karen tilted her head, with a half-smile curled like a cut. "This ticket looks fake," she declared, loud enough for every first-class passenger to hear. "People try this all the time." Beneath the expensive foundation, her eyes glittered with twisted delight, the thrill of being the center of attention, the authority, the one who knew best. A few passengers glanced up from their laptops. Others paused with their luggage half lifted. No one spoke, but their looks, quick evaluations, and silent assumptions formed an invisible line of allies behind Karen. Inside the cabin the air thickened. Judgments, suspicions quiet, guesses slid through the space like cold drafts, brushing every stare that landed on Sofia. Yet she stood firm. No retreat, no avoidance. No need to raise her voice. "This is my seat," Sofia said, her voice low but sharp, like signing a contract that could not be undone. Her fingers held the boarding pass tightly, even knowing Karen would snatch it away. And exactly as she expected, Karen ripped it from her hand with enough force to knock away the last bit of politeness she pretended to have. Karen lifted the ticket, tilting it left and right like she was examining evidence in some investigation, then scoffed. "Please." She dragged the word out, intentionally belittling Sofia in front of the entire cabin. "This is printed at home. I know what first class looks like." While Karen judged something inside, Sofia dissolved into old memories, years of being denied funding for lack of experience, raised eyebrows during her business pitches, the constant reminders to be realistic whenever she talked about building her own airline. She had heard these words before from the world. Now they were returning through Karen's voice like an echo from a distant past. But there was one thing Karen did not know, and neither did anyone in first class. The aircraft they were standing inside the airline, they were flying the service standards they enjoyed. All of it had begun from Sofia's idea. Karen raised her head, her voice sharper than before, pushing the drama higher. Security should check this. Fraud in progress. A few passengers shifted, demonstrating exaggerated annoyance. A middle-aged man whispered to his wife. Another one of those cases. A woman tapped her phone, ready to record, not to help Sofia, but to catch the drama. And Sofia, she observed every expression, every glance, every micro-reaction. She heard the murmurs soft, like rustling papers in a tense boardroom. But she also heard her own voice inside her mind, steady, clear, unwavering. "Mom, please return the ticket." Karen laughed through her nose. "Oh, honey, I know how this works. People like you don't get seat 1A. The sentence detonated in the air. Sharp, clear, intentional. Sophia felt the invisible stone thrown at her. She did not shake. She did not tremble. She only felt sadness for people who could only see the world through the narrow keyhole of prejudice. Right then, Alex Carter, the young flight attendant, stepped forward. His eyes landed on Sophia. He recognized her almost instantly, but he also remembered the strict rule. Never reveal the CEO's identity during a secret evaluation flight. He swallowed hard and spoke with perfect professionalism. Is there a problem here? Karen spun toward Alex like she had found a new ally. Yes. She stole this seat. Get her out of first class. Sophia caught Alex's eyes and saw the tension tightening every muscle on his face. But she did not relieve him with a single word. Not yet. Because with every passing second, Karen dug herself deeper into a hole she would never climb out of. Karen waved her hand dismissively. I have worked with airlines. I know the system. You, she pointed straight at Sophia, do not belong here. The words dropped like stones into still water. But instead of ripples, the surface, Sophia's face, stayed calm, reflecting a truth that could not be softened. Sometimes a person's own prejudice is the clearest indictment of who they truly are. In that moment, Sophia understood exactly what was about to happen. Karen believed she was protecting first class from a fraud, but she was speaking to the woman who owned every bolt, every screw, every inch of leather in the cabin where she stood. The woman who, with a single sentence, could force 3 airports to rewrite procedures, could make a contractor answer for their entire supply chain, and could send Karen into a storm she could never predict. Sophia inhaled not to argue, but to prepare for the truth that was about to hit like thunder for Karen and the entire first-class cabin watching her like a stranger. In Sophia's mind, only one thought remained. They have no idea who they just provoked. And then the cockpit door clicked open. A shadow appeared. The plot twist was arriving. The cockpit door swung open, and through the warm amber light, Captain Raymond Hernandez stepped out, his broad shoulders and steel, straight posture carrying the authority of a man whose patience had reached its limit. He did not need a single word. His mere presence silenced the entire cabin. Sophia looked at him, their eyes meeting for less than a second. A slight nod. A signal. No one else in the cabin understood it, but for Hernandez, it meant, do not reveal my identity, not yet. Karen, of course, noticed none of that. What she saw was a brand new stage and a bigger spotlight for herself. Captain, finally someone with authority, she practically lunged toward Hernandez like a person who had finally spotted her savior. Her voice shot up, shrill and triumphant. This woman she pointed at Sophia, her finger trembling from self-satisfaction, is using a fake ticket. I have been saying it. She needs to be removed immediately. Hernandez kept his composed expression, but a twitch at the corner of his eye revealed his awareness that this was far more serious than any routine, unruly passenger. He turned to Alex, then to Lisa, the lead flight attendant, watching from the forward galley. Status, he asked. Lisa answered carefully. Both passengers have valid boarding passes, Captain. Karen immediately rejected that, her voice sharp like a fire alarm. No, you are wrong. I work in aviation. I know what a real first-class passenger looks like. Sophia felt a brief sting in her chest, not from Karen's words, but from the repetition of a familiar insult. It carried the weight of years building her career. The meetings where she was mistaken for an assistant, the contract signings where people searched for the man behind her, even though there was none. But what made Sophia stronger than all of that was the truth. They had been wrong every single time, and Karen was no different. Karen continued her performance, turning her whole body toward the cabin, as if speaking to a massive virtual courtroom full of live-stream spectators. She does not belong here. Look at the seat. Look at the ticket. Look at her. The words speared through the air like arrows. A few passengers frowned. A man murmured to his wife, "This is getting ugly." An older woman clicked her tongue. Disgraceful behavior. But they remained silent, waiting to see who would be proven right and who would fall like an audience, watching the final act of a play they had no intention of interrupting. Hernandez studied Sophia more closely. There was recognition in his eyes, something deeper than rank or uniform, like seeing a familiar identity deliberately hidden. He lowered his voice just enough for Sophia to hear. "Do you want me to step in?" Sophia shook her head slightly. "Not yet." Hernandez nodded gently, but Karen misread it completely. "Thank you, Captain. I knew you would understand. Security needs to drag her out." "I am not flying with criminals." Hernandez turned to her, his voice sharpening like a freshly honed blade. "Ma'am, please take your seat while we clarify." Karen cut him off instantly. "No, I am not sitting anywhere until she is out of first class. I demand it." A single sentence that flipped the entire situation. Sophia noticed the phones pointed at her. Every recording was a fragment that would become a media firestorm within hours. She stood in the center of the cabin, straight-backed, silent, the eye of a growing storm. Karen kept shouting, "I want her arrested for fraud and identity theft," and impersonating staff. Hernandez exhaled a long, weary sigh that carried 2 decades of experience and the immediate knowledge that Karen had crossed far beyond any acceptable boundary. Lisa, who had witnessed countless on-board incidents, stepped forward. "Ma'am, your language is inappropriate. I am asking you to lower your voice." Karen spun toward her eyes, blazing. "Do not talk to me like that. You should be thanking me for catching the criminal on your plane." Sophia felt every stare land on her, but she did not flinch. She looked straight at Karen, and in that gaze was both restraint and pity, because Sophia knew what Karen had not yet realized. In a few minutes, her entire world would collapse. Alex looked at Sophia again, trying to hide his fear. If she asked, he would have to protect her no matter what. But Sophia asked for nothing. She simply drew a breath and set her briefcase gently on the nearest seat, not like someone preparing for confrontation, but like someone moments away from entering a boardroom. And then Karen made the most foolish move of all. She opened the overhead bin and pulled out a small leather box, Sophia's business card case. Karen threw her head back and laughed, as if she had uncovered golden evidence. Oh, look, she even made fake business cards. Sophia Ramirez, CEO of Apex Airways. The laughter stunned the entire cabin. A young passenger whispered, "Wait, Ramirez, that name sounds familiar." Sophia remained silent. Hernandez tightened his grip on his cap. Lisa's jaw dropped, and Karen held the card up like a trophy, turning it toward every camera. "Can you believe the audacity, CEO of Apex Airways, please?" She probably printed these in her garage. A heavy stillness rolled across the cabin. This was no longer just an insult. This was the moment where Karen unknowingly revealed the blade pointed at her own future. Sophia closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the front of the cabin was so quiet she could hear the engines humming gently as they waited for takeoff. Karen did not know it yet, but they had all just reached the edge of a turning point. Sophia lifted her head. Her voice was soft, low, but carried the unmistakable weight of a truth that could not be denied. "Captain," she said, not loudly, but enough for everyone to hear. "I believe it is time." Hernandez nodded. "I will tell them the truth." Karen let out a short laugh. "Truth, oh please go ahead. I would love to hear it." And in that instant, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. This was the bottom of the cliff just before the truth split the darkness like lightning, and Karen finally learned the lesson she had never imagined she would face. Up until now, Captain Hernandez turned back toward the entire first-class cabin. His expression was no longer the patient calm of a veteran pilot, but the stern resolve of a man about to bring an end to chaos. The cabin fell so silent that even the steady hum of the air vents felt amplified. Karen stood slightly off to the side, still clutching Sophia's business card like a trophy. She was smiling the smile of someone convinced she had already won. "Tell them," Karen urged, her eyes shining with self-satisfaction. "Tell everyone she's a fraud." But Sophia did not look at Karen. She looked at Captain Hernandez, her gaze steady and calm, like the surface of a lake before a storm. A single nod from her was enough for Hernandez to shift the fate of the entire cabin. He inhaled his voice, cutting through the air like a judge opening court. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an important announcement." Every eye snapped to him. The businessman in seat 2C closed his laptop. An older woman gripped her husband's sleeve. A young man filming lowered his phone without even realizing it. Karen froze, her entire body tense with anticipation, waiting for confirmation that she had been right. And then Hernandez spoke the words that shattered the stillness. "The passenger Ms. Whitmore is accusing." He turned slightly toward Sophia. "Is Sophia Ramirez?" Karen burst out laughing. "I know. That's the fake name on the fake business card." Hernandez continued, his voice low and sharp. "And she is the founder and the chief executive officer of Apex Airways." The declaration struck the cabin like lightning hitting solid ground. No one breathed. A young woman whispered, "Oh my God." A man dropped his pen. A married couple stared at each other, mouths open. And Karen froze completely. Her smile cracked like dried paint. The business card in her hand trembled violently, suddenly feeling 10 times heavier. What?" Karen stammered, her voice paper thin. No, that's not. That can't be true." But the cabin no longer needed further explanation. Lisa, the lead flight attendant, had already opened her tablet, turning the screen toward nearby passengers. "Apex Airways, Internal Crew Manifest Chief Executive Officer, Incognito Evaluation Flight Sophia Ramirez." Alex stood behind her, tension melting from his posture as he finally exhaled. "She's really the Chief Executive Officer," he whispered, awe written across his face. Karen looked at the screen, then at Sophia, then at the dozens of passengers staring back at her with cold, unforgiving eyes. The truth shattered around her like glass hitting stone. She stepped backward, but there was nowhere to escape. No, Karen said louder, more frantic, as if volume could rewrite reality. "This is some mistake. She can't be the Chief Executive Officer. She doesn't look like the sentence cut itself off." Karen understood. And so did everyone else. "Doesn't look like someone who could be a Chief Executive Officer." A woman in row 3 gasped. "Are you serious? A white man in seat 1. C shook his head in angry disbelief. "You judged her by her appearance. This is disgusting." And Sophia, she remained still. Standing in the center of the storm without raising her voice or stepping back, the faint curve at her lips was tinged not with triumph, but with sadness, the kind reserved for seeing the smallness of the beliefs someone had lived by for years. Hernandez stepped aside, creating a clear path for Sophia. And then Sophia did something no one expected. She reached for the business card in Karen's trembling hand, taking it so gently that Karen flinched, as if burned. Sophia looked at the card, then straight into Karen's eyes. "You held the real proof," she said, her voice soft yet sharp like a blade, "and you called it fake. Not because your reason told you so, but because your prejudice refused to believe otherwise." Karen collapsed into her seat, her entire body shaking as the flimsy illusion of power she clung to evaporated. Tears slipped from the edges of her now vacant eyes. But Sophia was not finished. She turned to the cabin, stepping half a pace forward, as though taking her place at the head of a room she owned. "I apologize for this disruption," she said, her voice even and clear, not trembling, not angry, but carrying the weight of someone who had lived through prejudice her entire life and was still standing tall. "I tried to fly as an ordinary passenger to see how my customers were treated." The cabin stayed silent, absorbing every syllable. "And today," she continued, "I have been reminded that we still have much work to do." Karen began sobbing, unable to contain herself. But Sophia didn't look at her again. Hernandez stood at attention, his expression filled with respect. Lisa placed a hand over her heart without even thinking. A single clap broke the silence from row 2. Then another from row 3. Then the entire cabin joined in. Karen covered her face, shrinking into herself, overwhelmed by a shame she had never imagined she would have to feel. And through the rising applause, Sophia looked out of the airplane window, where the afternoon light shimmered along the metal wing, and she knew this was only the beginning. The truth had finally stepped into the light, but justice still had a long journey ahead. The applause in the cabin had not even faded when Karen shot up like someone cornered in the dark. Her eyes were red mascara, smeared into thick black streaks down her cheeks, yet her voice still forced itself out in desperate trembling bursts. "You are all wrong. This is a setup. A scam. She's lying." The weak, quivering words fell flat into the heavy air, thick with truth no one cared to challenge any more. No one responded. Not a single sympathetic glance. Not one cooperating breath. The entire first-class cabin stood firmly on Sophia's side, the very woman Karen had labeled a fraud only minutes before. And Karen felt the illusion of power she had clung to crumble into ash like a light bulb, exploding into darkness. But her downfall was only beginning, because at that exact moment, a chorus of vibrations buzzed through the cabin, hundreds of phones, humming all at once, stretching the air tight like a warning of an approaching seismic shock. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Lisa frowned. Alex looked around nervously, and Karen felt the first drop of fear slide into her like icy water. What is that sound?" she whispered. The answer came with a weighted sigh from Hernandez. "Mom, that is your phone." Karen fumbled through her purse, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she unlocked the screen. And then a strangled gasp tore from her throat. Her screen was flooded with hundreds of notifications from Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and even her company email. Her own live stream, the one she proudly recorded to humiliate Sophia, was spreading faster than wildfire. 10,000 views, 40,000, 120,000. And at the top of her feed, Apex Airways CEO harassed Liv on her own plane, the headline of a news site that had already posted the clip. Karen stumbled backward, hitting the armrest of a seat, like someone shoved off balance. No, she whispered, lips trembling as if they might break. A young passenger in row 3, phone in hand, murmured quietly but sharply. "Your clip is going viral. The whole country is watching." The man in seat 1C added his voice, as heavy as a verdict. "You are famous now, but not the way you wanted." Karen covered her mouth, eyes widening, pupils shrinking, like she had just seen an endless abyss open before her. No one looked at her with pity. No one rushed to help. She had dug this hole alone. Sophia, in contrast, stood silent. Not smug, not gloating, just radiating a calm that made Karen feel even smaller. So small she seemed swallowed by her own actions. Hernandez lifted his radio, his voice shifting back into firm professional authority. "Ground control. This is Captain Hernandez of Apex Flight 227. We request security personnel upon landing. We have a severely disruptive passenger who intentionally attempted to harm a senior executive." Karen heard every word. Disruptive passenger. Harmed a senior executive. Security waiting for her. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. "No, please, Captain. Wait, I did not know who she was." Hernandez looked at her not with anger, but with the exhausted disappointment of someone who had seen far too much of this behavior throughout his career. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "that is exactly the problem. You should not need to know who someone is in order to treat them with basic respect." The words hit her like a final blow, collapsing her back into her seat. Tears dripped onto the cabin floor, mixing with the shame she had poured onto herself. Lisa stepped toward Sophia, voice trembling with emotion. "Ms. Ramirez, I am so deeply sorry you had to experience this." Sophia shook her head with a faint, sad smile, a quiet sorrow in her eyes. "It is not your fault. The fault lies in what people assume without ever questioning it." A few passengers lowered their heads, realizing they too had once looked at someone through a warped lens without noticing. Karen heard it all, and it only doubled her humiliation. Sophia Karen whispered shakily, her voice cracking like shattered glass. "I am sorry, I didn't mean." Sophia turned her gaze not cruel, but unyielding. "Karen," she said softly, yet with the precision of a blade, "you are not apologizing to me. You are apologizing to the truth you can no longer run from." Karen's breath hitched her defenses, collapsing entirely. She sank deeper into her seat, covering her face, her shoulders trembling like a child who had lost everything she once believed she possessed. But the heaviest blow was still ahead, because at that moment Karen's phone rang, this time not a notification, a call. On the screen, Ground Support Services, Headquarters Supervisor line. Karen's eyes widened, a sob escaping her lips. "Oh God," she whispered. She knew. The real storm was coming, and Sophia, standing in a circle of respect and quiet awe, exhaled a long, steady breath, the breath of someone who understood that true strength had nothing to do with a first-class seat. It was about how a person confronted injustice without bowing their head. The plane had not even taken off, but Karen's fate had already plunged like an aircraft in free fall, straight down, no brakes. Because justice, the very thing she mocked, had walked into the cabin, and no one, not even Karen, could escape it. Karen set her phone down as if it had burned her, her hands collapsing onto the seat fingernails, digging so tightly into the leather that her knuckles turned white. One glance at the caller identification from the corporate headquarters had been enough to tell her that her world was not just cracking, it was falling apart, piece by piece. And the cabin sank into a silence so dense it felt like everyone could hear Karen's heart pounding wildly in her chest like a trapped bird. Sophia stood there, calm as a fixed horizon. No raised hand, no shouting, no need to prove anything. The truth alone was large enough to eclipse everything else. Hernandez returned to the forward seat, preparing to file additional reports to ground control. Lisa gathered her security checklist, her movements careful, but unable to hide the deep respect she now held for Sophia. Passengers looked at Sophia with expressions entirely different from earlier. No more suspicion, no more judgment, only profound respect. Only Karen had nothing left to lean on. "Sophia, please." Karen whispered, trying to stand, but her legs had lost all strength, her fingers gripping the seat for support. "This is all a mistake, you have to believe me." Sophia turned her head, her gaze free of cruelty, yet devoid of softness. It was the look of someone who had seen countless people like Karen throughout her life, and understood that sometimes they had to face consequences to learn the lessons the world had never taught them. "You said one thing correctly, Karen," Sophia replied, her voice low and still like water before a storm. "This is a mistake, but it is not mine." Karen wanted to protest, to scream, to cling to whatever scraps of dignity she had left, but the words died in her dry throat. Alex stepped forward, speaking as gently as possible. "Mom, you need to sit down. We are waiting for instructions from the ground." But Karen could not sit. She was terrified. Terrified of what awaited her. Terrified of what people would say. Terrified of herself. Hot tears rolled down her cheeks, dragging streaks of mascara, like marks of humiliation she could never erase. Then Karen's screen lit up again. A new message from J. Higgins' executive office. "We need to discuss your conduct immediately. This is unacceptable." Karen sucked in a sharp breath, her chest rising and falling like she was struggling for air. "Oh God, please no," she whispered, dropping her head against the seat, her hair falling like a curtain to hide her collapsing face. A young passenger in row 3 spoke quietly, but the entire cabin heard him. She brought this on herself. An older man nodded. We all saw what she did. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It's who she is. Karen covered her ears, as if the words were stones hurled directly at her shattered pride. But what destroyed her completely was Sophia's voice. Not loud, not angry, just truthful. And sometimes the truth is colder than a verdict. Karen Sophia said, taking one slow, steady step toward seat 1A. "I have met people like you all my life. You think you are defending order rules. But what you are really protecting is a prejudice that was never true." Karen lifted her tear-filled eyes, clinging to Sophia like a drowning person reaching for driftwood. "I am sorry, Sophia. Please, I did not know. You do not need to know who I am, Sophia. Cut in soft but razor-sharp. You only need to know how to respect another human being." Karen broke down, completely sobbing uncontrollably, and that the irony of it was the plot twist she never saw coming. She had spent her life judging others by appearances, never realizing the only thing she should have feared was the truth in the hands of the person standing before her. Hernandez received a signal through his earpiece. He turned, lifted the microphone, and spoke with absolute clarity. "Cabin crew attention, please. Ground control instructs us to maintain the current situation. Security will be present as soon as we leave the gate. They wish to speak directly with passenger Karen Whitmore." Karen collapsed into her seat, burying her face in her palms as if she wished she could disappear. A passenger whispered, "She's done." Another woman murmured. She recorded her own downfall. On her own phone. Sophia breathed in softly, not out of pride, but to steady her heart in the storm someone else had created. She looked at Karen one last time. "I hope someday you will understand that what matters on a flight is not the seat you sit in, but how we treat each other." Karen wept openly. Not because she would be detained, not because she had been recorded, but because for the first time in her life she saw the real version of herself, and she could not bear it. Sophia turned away, placing one hand gently on the headrest of seat 1A. This was the seat she had designed. This was the airline she had built. This was the world she had created from nothing. And today, right here in this aircraft cabin, real power had returned to its rightful owner, without shouting, without force, simply through truth. And truth will always outshine every noise. The flight had not taken off yet, but the story had already soared far beyond the first-class cabin and was ready to explode across America. Karen did not know it yet, but Sophia understood perfectly. The crash at the end of this downfall would shake an entire industry. The engines outside hummed softly as the crew prepared to close the aircraft door. Yet inside the first-class cabin, the air had thickened into something so heavy it felt as though it could be sliced with a blade. Karen curled into her seat, hands trembling as she clutched her phone like it was a bomb, moments from detonating. Sophia stood in the aisle, her calm presence grounding the room like the single steady point at the center of a violent storm. But the storm was no longer circling her. It was circling Karen, and Karen was unraveling like someone trapped in a whirlpool without knowing how to swim. A soft ping chimed through the intercom. Lisa pressed her earpiece, and her expression shifted instantly. "Captain," she whispered, "operations just sent an update. The situation is escalating faster than expected." Hernandez nodded, his face darkening. "How many now?" "More than 900,000 views and climbing every second." Karen screamed, "What, that is impossible!" But no one answered her. No explanation was needed. They all knew. Karen's panic rippled through the cabin like a siren blaring in the middle of the night. Now only two emotions remained in the air: the deep respect for Sophia and the spreading fear radiating from Karen like a crack running along glass that could never be repaired. Sophia said nothing, only watched Karen with a quiet gaze, the gaze of someone who had witnessed countless people learning the hardest lesson of their lives, a lesson born from their own wrongdoing. Suddenly, a man in seat 2C spoke, his voice steady and unwavering. "I saw everything. If authorities need a witness, I will speak. A woman in row 3B added me too. What she did was unacceptable. A young man raised his phone. My live stream recorded all of it. I will send a copy to the airline." Each voice rose like stones, dropped into still water, sending waves across the cabin. Karen whipped her head around, terrified. "Stop, all of you, stop. You are ruining my life." Her voice was frayed. Her power dissolved, her pride reduced to shreds. But what shattered her completely was when Sophia finally spoke. Not loudly. Not with anger. Not for revenge. Just the truth, but the truth can be more merciless than any accusation. Karen Sophia said gently, "No one in this cabin is destroying your life. Only your own actions could do that." Karen shook her head, tears dropping onto the floor like shards of broken glass. "Please, please, someone talk to my company. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." Sophia tilted her head slightly, eyes deep, as if seeing straight through the mask Karen had worn for years. "Do you truly believe," she asked, her voice so low and steady that the cabin fell silent, that anyone will trust your explanation over the truth you live-streamed with your own hands. Karen choked on her breath. The answer was so obvious it did not need to be spoken. Sophia stepped back, giving room for Hernandez to speak. The captain adjusted his uniform shoulders and delivered his words like a final verdict. Operations requests that all evidence and recordings be preserved. Authorities will board the aircraft when we return to the gate. No, Karen shouted. You cannot do this. I did not commit a crime. Lisa responded, her voice calm, yet sharp as a blade. You committed defamation. You disrupted the flight. You harassed a passenger. You verbally abused a crew member. And you intentionally spread false information to humiliate a senior executive. Alex added, his voice trembling but firm, not to mention clear discriminatory behavior. Karen staggered, every word landing like a blow against the truth she had tried so hard to outrun. But the final strike that crushed her came from her own phone, a soft chime, a new email, ground support services termination, notice draft ready. Karen slapped a hand over her mouth, her sobs strangled into tiny broken sounds. No one in the cabin mocked her. No one smirked. No one cheered. Because this was no longer a spectacle. This was the unveiling of truth, a portrait stripped bare, a person forced to confront the worst parts of herself. And Sophia, the woman Karen had insulted, lied about, and degraded, simply stood there with a quiet understanding. She knew something Karen had never understood. Real power never needs to scream. It reveals itself the moment someone tries to crush it. Hernandez spoke into his radio. Ground confirmed security arrival. A voice replied through static. Security is waiting at the gate. You may return to dock. Sophia inhaled deeply before taking her seat. Seat 1A. The seat she designed when Apex Airways had only its first aircraft. The cabin fell silent. Karen trembled next to her in seat 1C, her face pale as though she might faint. The passengers exchanged glances, each one aware that the plane had not yet lifted a single wheel off the ground, but Karen's life had already gone into free fall. And at the center of the storm, Sophia slowly closed her eyes, not to rest, but to prepare. Because she knew what was coming, a larger conversation, not only for Karen, but for the entire aviation industry. A sharp click echoed as the aircraft detached from the jet bridge, slowly being pushed back toward the gate under the instructions of ground security. But inside the first-class cabin, no one even noticed the movement. Every eye was fixed on the two women, sitting at opposite ends of the emotional spectrum, one sitting upright with the steady calm of someone who held real power, and the other collapsing under the weight of the storm she had created. Karen pressed herself against the window, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Every vibration from the phone in her bag felt like another blow to whatever remained of her composure. If she could have disappeared into the seat, she would have. But truth doesn't vanish. It waits. It reveals. Sophia opened her eyes as the wheels came to a stop. She did not look at Karen anymore. She did not need to. The storm had swept Karen so far away that no one had to push it further. But Sophia sensed something else stirring in the cabin. Not only respect, not only relief that the truth had surfaced, but something deeper, an awakening. A middle-aged man in seat 2. A leaned forward, speaking softly, almost confessing. I doubted you when you boarded the plane. Not because you looked like a cheat, but because I thought you did not fit in seat 1A. Sophia looked at him, not accusing, simply asking, and now he swallowed. Now I feel ashamed. A young woman in seat 3. Bee eyes red from emotion, whispered, I have been through something like this before. Not as severe, but I know the feeling of being treated like you do not belong. Today, thank you for standing there and facing it for so many of us. An older woman in seat 1C, right beside Karen, lifted her head and said with a trembling but sincere voice, You did not just teach her a lesson, you taught all of us. Karen heard every word. And it was these words, not the fear of security, not the threat of losing her job, not the viral video that cut the deepest, because they were the truth she had never dared to face. She was the problem. She had always been the problem. Hernandez's radio crackled, slicing through the silence. Apex 227 permission granted. Security team is in position. He looked at Sophia, waiting for the final signal. She gave a small nod. Not triumphant. Not vengeful. Simply it is time. Lisa opened the cabin door. A blast of cold air from the jet bridge rushed in, followed by the firm footsteps of the Los Angeles airport security team. 3 officers appeared, 2 men and 1 woman, dressed in black uniforms and carrying the kind of authority that could not be argued with. Karen saw them and shot to her feet like someone facing death itself. No, please just listen, this is not I did not. The female officer raised a hand, calm and commanding. Ma'am, please come with us. Karen shook her head, breathless with panic. No, please. I didn't commit a crime. I didn't hurt anyone. I didn't know she was. Sophia stood. Karen fell silent instantly. Not because Sophia intimidated her, but because Karen had lost every word she once wielded like a weapon the moment she had to face the kindness she no longer deserved. Sophia stepped closer, stopping at an arm's length. Karen, she said, gently, her voice flowing like water over stone. I do not want to destroy your life. Karen lifted her tear-soaked eyes, desperate for hope. Sophia continued, But you must take responsibility for your choices, not because I am the chief executive officer, but because you forgot how to see and respect another human being. Karen crumpled her tears, falling heavily like rain. I am sorry, Sophia nodded softly. I hope this time your apology is for what you didn't for the consequences you are facing. The security officers stepped in. One placed a hand on Karen's shoulder. She did not resist. Her strength had abandoned her. As Karen was escorted down the aisle, something unexpected happened. No one mocked her. No one clapped. No one lifted their phone to record. Not because they pitied her, but because the lesson had already been delivered perfectly, painfully, completely. Karen left the cabin like a fading shadow, a silhouette shattered by her own actions. When the door closed, Lisa exhaled a long, heavy breath, as if releasing the weight of an entire world. Sophia returned to seat 1A, placing her hand on the soft leather, as though touching a piece of her own history, built from sweat and perseverance. Every gaze turned toward her, but instead of discomfort, she sat upright, feet firmly on the floor, eyes forward. Hernandez adjusted the microphone and spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will prepare for takeoff in a few minutes. A passenger in seat 2. A called out, speaking for the entire cabin. Thank you, Miss Ramirez. More voices followed. Thank you, spreading like gentle waves. Sophia did not smile in victory. She simply bowed her head lightly, because to her, this was not revenge. This was truth being seen, justice being named. A moment when a woman who had been underestimated chose to stand without needing anyone else's voice to lift her up. And as the engines roared louder, preparing to lift the aircraft into the Los Angeles night sky, Sophia whispered silently to herself, "The work is not finished. It has only just begun." The engine noise grew steadily as the aircraft rolled away from the gate, leaving behind the image of Karen being escorted out in complete collapse. But inside the first-class cabin, something entirely different was rising. Not chaos, but a strange, profound stillness, the kind that follows a great storm. Sophia settled back into seat 1A. The leather was still soft, the stitching still perfect, exactly as it had been the day she approved the final prototype for production. But today, that seat was no longer just her design. It had become the symbol of a lesson the entire cabin had just witnessed with their own eyes. Hernandez returned to the cockpit, his voice carrying through the speakers. "Prepare for takeoff." The cabin tilted gently as the plane aligned with the runway, the lights of Los Angeles glittering outside like scattered uneven stars. But even that view could not pull attention away from something stronger, the way passengers continued glancing toward Sophia. Respect, gratitude, and a hint of curiosity. A young woman in row 3B leaned forward, her voice soft but clear enough for Sophia to hear. "Thank you for not staying silent." Sophia turned her gaze warm. "It is not that I wanted to speak," she said. "But sometimes silence makes what is wrong even stronger." The words struck several passengers deeply, people who had stayed quiet many times out of fear of conflict, out of uncertainty, out of believing their voice did not matter. But tonight they had seen something undeniable. Sometimes one person standing still at the right moment is enough to change an entire story. An older man in seat 1C exhaled heavily. "I have to admit, when I first saw what was happening, I did not intervene because I thought it was not my place." Sophia smiled gently without blame. "We have all been there. What matters is realizing when silence becomes complicity." Lisa, having completed the safety checks, approached with emotion in her voice. "Ms. Ramirez, I want to apologize. Not just for today, but because sometimes we, the people who serve passengers directly, may unintentionally hurt them without even realizing it." Sophia touched Lisa's hand lightly, a gesture of reassurance. "What matters is that you stood on the right side today. You protected your passenger even before you knew who she was." Lisa's eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with relief. Her sense of integrity washed clean of the stain she had witnessed, but not caused. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, passengers settled back into their seats, but no one fully relaxed. The moment they had just lived through was too powerful, too real, too deep to fade quickly. When the engines roared and the plane lifted off the ground, Sophia closed her eyes. In that instant, suspended between earth and sky, she was not thinking about Karen, not about the live stream, not about the viral explosion happening across the country. She was thinking about the passengers, about every person, every question, every gaze, every expectation they placed on her airline. She had not built Apex Airways to create an empire. She built it to create a world where no one would be treated as an intruder simply because they did not look like a default first-class passenger. When the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, the cabin lights shifted to a warm gold. Hernandez announced, "We have reached a stable altitude. You may use your electronic devices." Several passengers opened their phones. Their faces lit up instantly as notifications flashed. Viral clip trending, breaking news, Apex Chief Executive Officer harassed on board, footage spreading nationwide, A young passenger whispered, "My God, it has over 2 million views already." The man in seat 1C tapped the screen, and social media is on her side. But the real plot twist was unfolding inside Sophia's mind. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She did not savor the feeling of winning. Instead, she gazed out the window, the moonlight spilling across the torn edges of the clouds like silver fabric, and in her mind, the most important question rose. If this had happened to an ordinary passenger, not a chief executive officer, would they have been protected, or would they have been forced off the plane like so many before them? She tightened her hand on the armrest, the thought striking her like lightning. There must be change. There must be procedures. There must be training. There must be safeguards to prevent abuse of authority. Lisa returned, placing a glass of water on the small table before Sophia. "If you need anything." Sophia shook her head. "No. But after today, I think we all have work to do." Hernandez stepped out of the cockpit again, walking down the aisle with purpose. His eyes searched for Sophia. "When we land," he said quietly, "there are about 30 reporters waiting, and operations wants an emergency meeting." Sophia exhaled slowly, not a tired sigh, but one of someone who knew the moment they had just lived through had shifted the course of her career and the future of the aviation industry. "I will speak to them," Sophia said, "but not to attack a passenger, to talk about something bigger." "What?" Hernandez asked. Sophia looked down at her own hands that had signed thousands of documents, built an entire airline, and yet had been dismissed as unworthy of touching seat 1A. About how she said people are judged by what they seem to be instead of who they truly are. And as if the entire cabin had heard her, many passengers lifted their heads. Not because Sophia had spoken loudly, but because they had just realized something. Sophia Ramirez, the woman Karen tried to humiliate, was not just a chief executive officer. She was the person who was about to redefine how people would be treated in the skies of America. The aircraft raced toward Dallas through the night, but everyone on board knew one thing: when this plane landed, change would begin. When the wheels touched down on the Dallas runway, the first-class cabin slowly filled with the warm gold of airport lights. But instead of the usual sense of relief that comes with landing, the cabin held a heavy collective anticipation, as if everyone knew that just beyond the aircraft door, an entire world was waiting to erupt. Sophia opened her eyes. She did not startle, did not tense up. She simply tightened her seatbelt, the quiet gesture of someone preparing to step into a battle she already knew she would win, not through power, but through truth. Hernandez spoke over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dallas. Please remain seated until we come to a full stop. We have special support from ground operations." Special support, the phrase made several passengers exchange knowing glances, but no one was surprised. They had all seen enough on their phones to understand that this flight had become a national story. Once the aircraft came to a complete stop, the door opened. Immediately, a flood of flashing lights burst through the gap like a storm of white fire. Camera shutters, voices calling, reporters pushing forward. Sophia Ramirez. Is it true you were harassed on your own airline? Ms. Ramirez, do you plan to press charges? Sophia. What do you want to say about discrimination on flights? Dozens of questions crashed together, like waves colliding in a storm. But before anyone could enter the cabin, airport security formed a human barrier, holding the reporters at the entrance. Lisa looked at Sophia, worried. You do not have to speak to them right away. Sophia replied calmly. No, I want to. Hernandez stepped forward, a quiet smile at the corner of his lips. You have the entire aviation industry standing behind you now. Sophia tilted her head, her eyes bright with determination. And the future of vulnerable passengers is waiting for me ahead. When the cabin door opened fully, the airport security team entered first, guiding passengers to disembark in order. But something unexpected happened. No one left. They remained voluntarily, as if they knew they were about to witness a moment that would become a small piece of the airline's history. The man in seat 2A spoke loudly, his voice filled with pride. We are with you, Sophia. A young woman lifted her phone, not to livestream this time, but as if wanting to capture the moment for herself. A married couple held hands, their eyes shining with emotion. Sophia rose slowly from seat 1A. The rows of seats stretched before her like a ceremonial path. Passengers quietly stepped aside along the aisle. A clear corridor opened, less out of respect for her title as chief executive officer, and more out of respect for the woman who had stood firm through humiliation to defend her dignity. In that moment, Sophia felt her heart tremble, not with fear, but with the overwhelming strength of unity. She walked toward the front of the cabin, paused at the doorway, looked out at the hallway where dozens of microphones pointed toward her like an electric forest. And she exhaled softly the breath of someone about to say what needed to be said long ago. As she stepped down onto the jet bridge, the flash of cameras lit up like fireworks. A young reporter pushed forward, voice trembling with excitement. Ms. Ramirez, what message do you want to send to America today? Sophia did not need to think. The words came instantly clear and precise, as though she had carried them her entire life. What happened today was not a misunderstanding. It was the result of a dangerous habit, judging people solely by how they look. The crowd fell completely silent. Sophia continued, her voice rising stronger than the heartbeat of the reporters holding their microphones. If I were not the chief executive officer, if I were just an ordinary passenger, what would have happened? Would I have been forced off the plane, humiliated with no one standing up? Or worse, would people think I deserved it? A female reporter covered her mouth, moved. Sophia went on, her tone slowing, but her words cutting sharper than a blade. Today I stood my ground because I was fortunate enough to have power. But millions of people out there do not. Another reporter called out, "What is your next step?" Sophia looked straight into the cameras, her eyes blazing, not from the lights, but from conviction. Apex Airways will implement mandatory anti-bias training for every aviation employee we collaborate with. We will establish a transparent reporting system for passengers who have experienced discrimination. And we will ensure that no one is removed from their seat simply because they do not look like what someone imagines a first-class passenger should look like. Reporters erupted with questions, but an older journalist cut through the noise, his voice solemn. "Ms. Ramirez, why are you not angry?" Sophia paused for a single breath. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once trembled with fear before investors, yet now rested calm as wind at dawn. Then she lifted her gaze and delivered the sentence that would echo across the country by morning. Anger doesn't change the world. Truth does. Applause erupted behind her. Then another. Then an entire wave rising from the passengers who had just stepped off the flight. Hernandez, Lisa, Alex. Every one of them stood applauding Sophia, as if applauding a beacon lighting the path for an aviation industry long clouded by bias and judgment. Sophia bowed her head slightly. Not in pride, not in victory, but in sincerity, true to who she had always been. A final reporter shouted, "Do you think today will affect Karen Whitmore's career?" Sophia stopped, turned her head. Her eyes carried no hatred, only closure. "The consequences do not come because someone wants to punish Karen," she said. "The consequences come because Karen chose them." And with that, Sophia walked toward her operations team, ready for the emergency meeting, ready for change, ready for the next fight. But what she did not know was this: at that very moment, in a room just a few gates away, Karen was already facing her first consequence. A decision. A future slipping away. A downfall far deeper than anything the live stream had captured. Karen sat alone in the temporary interrogation room at Dallas Airport, a cold, barren space with silver metal walls, hard plastic chairs, and ceiling lights, so harsh they exposed every flaw on her face. Smudged mascara, tangled hair, blood on her lower lip where she had bitten too hard. There was no trace left of the platinum elite woman who had once strutted through the cabin with misplaced authority. Her phone had been confiscated. The outside world was still burning with the live stream she herself had pushed out. Every passing minute brought thousands of new comments, thousands of people saying her name, thousands enraged. Karen Whitmore had become a cautionary tale delivered in the cruelest way life could offer. The door opened. A security officer stepped in with a man in a grey suit, the legal representative for ground support services. Karen jolted upright, her voice trembling violently. "Tom, please tell me this isn't what I think it is." "Please." Tom did not look her in the eye. He placed a stack of papers on the table, his voice cold as steel. "Karen, this is your termination notice, effective immediately." Karen collapsed back into the chair. No, Tom, you know me. You know me." "I made a mistake, just one mistake," Tom cut her off, offering no softness. "Your mistake damaged our relationship with our most important client. The chief executive officer of Apex Airways is a key figure in the entire contract network. The viral video forced us into an emergency meeting." Karen tried to swallow her tears, but they poured freely. "I apologized. I truly apologized. You live-streamed discrimination, defamation, harassment, and threats toward the woman who leads one of the largest airlines in the western United States." Tom said, "All patience gone. We cannot allow you to represent the company for another second." Karen buried her face in her hands. "I didn't know she was the chief executive officer." Tom delivered the line that sealed everything. "And that is the entire problem." The sentence slammed shut like a coffin lid. The security officer placed more documents on the table: violation reports, orders to appear in court civil and criminal investigation summons. Karen stared at the thick stack, her hands shaking too hard to hold a pen. "Why is this so serious? I only, Tom crossed his arms. "You didn't only anything. You live-streamed 45 minutes destroying the reputation of an airline chief executive officer. You recorded the evidence against yourself." Karen's arms dropped. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly, completely without anything to hold on to. The officer continued, "You may leave today, but your passport will be held, and you are banned from flying on any airline until this case is resolved." Karen broke into sobs. "Please, don't take away my ability to fly. That's my life." Tom watched her for a long moment. If there was a shred of pity in his eyes, it vanished when he replied, "You should have thought about that before pointing a phone at an innocent person." Karen collapsed, her cries echoing through the empty room. But Sophia's story was far from finished. While Karen was escorted through the security hall like a dim, fading shadow, Sophia entered the Apex Airways emergency conference room, a glass-walled space overlooking the runway, glowing with blue and red lights. More than a dozen senior executives were waiting. When she stepped in, they all straightened, not because of her title, but because of respect. Apex's chief operating officer, Kevin Miles, stepped forward. "Sophia, the entire country is talking about this. The media wants to interview you within 3 hours. The board has also called." Sophia set her bag down, pulled out a chair, and sat upright. "Then we need to do the right thing before speaking to the press." Kevin nodded. "I've prepared 3 response strategies: a formal apology statement, an update to passenger safety policy, or a public message about anti-discrimination." Sophia shook her head. Not enough. She looked around the table, meeting each gaze. "We need to change the way the entire aviation industry views passengers. Not just apologize. Not just improve. We will lead." The room went silent. Sophia placed her hands on the glass table. "Tomorrow I will contact the National Aviation Council. I want to build a cross-airline coalition to establish mandatory anti-bias standards." "Mandatory," Kevin repeated, stunned. "Yes. I don't want one airline to adopt it. I want the whole industry to adopt it." A legal director interjected. "Sophia, that has never been done. Airlines never agree on a shared standard." Sophia smiled, soft yet sharp as forged steel. "They will agree, because if they don't, their customers will ask why Apex can do it, and they cannot." The looks around the table changed instantly, not doubt, but fire. The fire of people about to create a new chapter. "And one more thing," Sophia continued. "We are launching the Dignity Flight program." Kevin tilted his head. "Which is a support fund for passengers who experience discrimination on any airline. We will provide lawyers emotional support services and a reporting platform, and we will cover all costs." A director exclaimed, "Sophia, that is something the government should be doing." But Sophia interrupted with a sentence that froze the room. "Since when does justice have to wait for the government?" No one dared argue, because they understood Sophia was not talking about today. She was talking about the future of millions. Later that night, when Sophia left the conference room, she walked alone through the long hallway facing the runways. Planes continued taking off one by one, leaving long streaks of light across the sky like moving stars. Sophia paused before a glass panel. The image reflected back at her was calm, strong, and carrying the quiet exhaustion only leadership could understand. She whispered to her reflection, for those who were told they do not belong, for the future of safer flights, for justice in the sky. And in that vast airport, Sophia smiled a soft, weighted smile. Not a smile of victory, a smile of purpose. As for Karen, she exited the airport through a side door, hiding her face under a jacket, avoiding the reporters waiting outside. But no matter where she fled, the video followed. It had become training material in dozens of corporate meetings, hundreds of staff briefings, countless conversations across America. Karen was left alone in her small rented home, the blue glow of her laptop screen casting shadows on her stunned face. The video she had recorded herself was now being used as the main example in Apex's new Anti-Bias Training 101. One sentence, just one, echoed through the speakers. "People like you don't belong in first class," Karen cried, but this time not because of fear. Not because of losing her job, not because of legal consequences. She cried because she finally saw herself. And Sophia, 1 month later, stood in the United States Capitol in a congressional hall before national cameras delivering her opening statement. I am not here to talk about how I was insulted. I am here to talk about how we create a sky where everyone is treated with dignity. It was the beginning of a new chapter for the aviation industry. A chapter soon known by a simple name, the Ramirez Standard. As Sophia stepped out of the Capitol building, the night wind brushed through her hair. She looked up at the sky, a plane taking off against the orange glow of sunset. And she understood, justice is not only seen, it is built. One flight, one person, one moment where we choose to stand on the side of what is right. Her journey was far from over. But that night in Washington, D.C., Sophia Ramirez understood one thing clearly. She had changed the sky. Today's story is not just a confrontation in a first-class cabin, but a vivid demonstration of how prejudice can shape perceptions and behavior, even in environments considered standard and professional. From the perspective of sociologists and human resource experts, it is clear that real power does not lie in a title or temporary status, but in the ability to remain steadfast, to respect the dignity of others, and to turn justice into concrete action. Sophia Ramirez has shown the strength of resilience and leadership while also setting a new standard for the aviation industry. If you find this story inspiring and worth sharing, please like and subscribe so you do not miss future videos. And before you go, leave a short comment. Stand for justice.